Charles Arian. I'm a member of the Foreign Service class of '81. Although I was one of those folks who got here and quickly discovered other interests, which I think is why the Humanities and International Affairs major was created. So I'm today a rabbi. I currently serve a congregation, but I've also done quite a bit of work in the field of Christian-Jewish relations. I have a few memories that I'd like to share. And I should say that when I was a student here, I knew nothing about what Professor Karski had done during the war. I really only learned that when the movie Shoah came out, and that was the reason that I saw the movie. Some Jews love to see, or love is the wrong word, but go to see Holocaust movies and plays and stuff like that. I don't generally, but I went to see that only because I knew that one of my professors was in the film. But one of my memories of him is that he was, when I was here, the only professor who, prior to the high holidays, made arrangements to tape his lectures so that the Jewish students in his class could go to the dean's office and pick up lectures. There were other professors who would do that if you asked, but he was the only one that I remember who sort of affirmatively said, if you're Jewish and you're not going to be here on the holidays, copies of the lectures will be in the dean's office. And it was only, many years later that I sort of understood that connection. As a rabbi who teaches, one of the things that I learned from him is kind of directness. And I was struck by what Professor Cerny said about not worrying so much about the rigidity of disciplines. Because I remember in his modern foreign governments class one time discussing the constitutional system of Great Britain and the role of the monarch, and he was explaining how the monarch technically could veto legislation, but never actually did so. And he didn't use euphemisms. I remember him saying, "She may do it, but if she do it, they will cut to her the head." Which is a good way of putting it, I thought. And I don't remember much from that class, but I remember that. I also remember having him in class the day that it was announced that John Paul II had been elected as Pope. And he came into class and, got himself set the way that Peter described. And then he came up to the podium and he said, "I give you all fair warning. From now on, to tell Polish joke will be mortal sin." But one of the things that I also gained from subsequently learning more about Professor Karski, and that has helped me really in my work in the field of Christian-Jewish relations. And I should add, parenthetically, that the last time I was in this room was about a year ago, when there was a small colloquium of Catholic Bible scholars with Jewish interlocutors that the President's Office had organized, looking at the Church's position vis-a-vis Jews and Judaism and how it had evolved and now seems to be evolving back a little bit, and what the Church and what Georgetown can really do about that. And one of the things that strikes me really is that, having known Professor Karski, I was better able than many to understand John Paul II and to understand the role that he played and why there was so much progress in his papacy in the field of Christian-Jewish relations. And it was because of that personal connection, and that both John Paul and Karski came out of that intellectual milieu, lived with Jews, studied with Jews, and it was really that personal time more than anything else, I think, that allowed that kind of progress. and it really is, for me it was a learning. My wife and I are fortunate. We're staying in Wolfington Hall, the Jesuit residence here on campus, and I was telling this last night to Father Walsh, who is really my mentor, and I think he's still in the back of the room. And he reminded me of a statement that I had made that I had forgotten. But understand, I was saying at the time, I was saying last night that most Jews of my age have been raised to believe that all Poles were anti-Semites. And that, you know, I was born after the Shoah, but, you know, lost relatives, and parents certainly were alive during that period. And, you know, so that's why learning about Karski was really a surprise, because you would not have expected it. And Father Walsh reminded me that I actually had made that statement back in 1981. I had said that whatever was happening, the Poles deserved it because they all shared in the guilt. And of course, I didn't know about Karski at the time. So that kind of learning has been, I think, helpful to me professionally, both in terms of understanding the milieu and in terms of understanding really the importance of interpersonal relationships and how our theology often tracks our life experience and not the other way around.
Thank you so much, everyone on the panel. I'm sure many of those stories resonated with many of you, and you have apologies for all of our variations on the Karski accent. I will share this with you. I was one day in the barn where my horse was boarded, and I was doing really mundane things, brushing a horse, cleaning the feet, and I hear this perfect Karski accent. I thought, well, what's going on? He said, "You were my DA back." And so, make a long story short, he was also a student of Karski's, and then everyone was regaled with Karski memories who had, until then, no idea of this incredible man. So we all have wonderful memories. Before we move to your questions and memories and comments, we want to take the next 20 minutes or so in discussion of Dr. Karski as a legend of Georgetown, since after all, that's the title of this event. So I have a few questions for the panel, who I hope will treat the questions as an opportunity to have an informal conversation about our friend. So the first question is, and any of you are privy to take it, what first was Jan's impact on the student experience here at Georgetown? And perhaps, Peter, you're well disposed to start there. And I think you spoke to that quite eloquently already.
At the time we had him, I recognized one of my classmates, Terrence Bergen, here. At the time we had Professor Karski, all we knew is that he had been tortured by the Gestapo. We didn't know, I don't remember knowing, that he was involved in reporting to the Allies on what was going on in terms of exterminating Jews. But the impact on us at the time was as something, you know, he was out of this world. He was something that I, who was probably one of the poorest students at Georgetown at the time, you know, and seeing this man, you know, no one in my family had ever been to college, and seeing this man from Eastern Europe, like from a movie, was a tremendous impact. And his lecturing was, it was like a performance. Once he got in that room, he was on. And then I think his impact, when I found out his story, it grew a lot deeper over the years. I personally think his story is as compelling as Schindler's. If you read his book, you know, he escaped. First he escapes the Russians, and otherwise he would have been massacred at Caden. Then he escapes the Gestapo by basically giving a speech to his fellow prisoners on a freight car train, because if they don't approve his attempt to escape, they're all going to be shot. And then, you know, it's a story of the underground, and I remember one particular story which was very touching to me. It's a story of his first student, a fellow named Tad Lasowski. And at the time in occupied Poland, teaching a young man and having schools was very difficult, obviously, with the Nazis around, and they had very meager resources, and they only picked out the brightest and the most discreet young men and women. And there was one friend of his, and she had a young boy named Tad who was the opposite. He was a hellraiser, he visited brothels, and he was reckless. But she said, "Could you please take my son under your wing?" And sure enough, Jan did, and he turned the boy's life around in the middle of a war. And I remember the story of his last time he saw the boy when he was going off to officers' school, which was a school by which young men learned how to pester the Germans and to blow up things, and etc. The young boy says, "Can I tell you a story?" And Karski's response, "I have nothing better to do today than listen to Tad Lisowski." So his impact, obviously, on him was life-changing. I would say his impact on us was certainly life-enriching, if not changing.
Rabbi, as a student,
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, in all honesty, the impact is more retrospective than anything else. And you know, I mean, certainly when I was here, I mean, he was a well-known and a popular professor, but there were so many well-known and popular and legendary professors, and in all honesty, I took this course because it was a required core course, not because I was particularly interested in the subject matter. But having said that, he did make it interesting, and I thought was a very good and well prepared and very direct teacher. But the impact, I think, is really retrospective, and I'm reminded of a story about actually the Jewish Theological Seminary, which in a similar era was all European refugee scholars, and many of whom were not known for their skill in the classroom. And the rector said to a student who was unhappy with the level of the courses, he said, "Your problem is you think you came here to learn something." And the student says, "Well, what am I here for?" And he says, "You're here to sit at the feet of great men." And having sat at the feet of a great man like Jan Karski, I think, marks me as very blessed and very privileged. And you have these little reminders, like when the last time I was in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem, and just walking down the row of trees planted by righteous Gentiles, and stopping and seeing Karski's tree, and telling my wife about him, and so on and so forth. So it was a great privilege.
Thank you. And for faculty and staff, similar question: what can current faculty and staff learn from Karski's example?